Alright, today we're diving into Chaos Zero Nightmare and talking about one of my favorite topics in the game, neutral cards. These are the cards that can fit into almost any build, no matter what faction or strategy you're playing. If you've ever looked at your deck and thought, I need something flexible that just works, then you're already thinking like a neutral card enjoyer. Some of these cards are absolute game changers, and when used correctly, they can carry runs that would otherwise fall apart. In this video, I'll walk you through the best neutral cards in Chaos Zero Nightmare, explain why they're so strong, and more importantly, how they synergize with different playstyles. Whether you're aiming for raw damage, survivability, or some crazy combo potential, there's a neutral option that can elevate your deck. So sit back, relax, and let's break down which neutral cards are truly worth your slots and how to get the most value out of them. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking neutral cards in Chaos Zero Nightmare. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. The neutral cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Consecutive Attack, Heavy Bash, Devotion, Tackle, Atomic Decomposition, Aimed Fire, Pulverize, Protective Shout, Counterattack, Preparation, Wind of Relief, Relentless Endurance, Recycling, Strategic Starting Point, Somnolent Fruit, Camouflage, Knowledge of Darkness, Tactical Reformation, Acid Gas, Shell Forming Cell, and Forbidden Algorithm. Let's hit that part of the tier list where cards aren't terrible, but they definitely make you pause and go, why are you still in my deck? Yep, welcome to the C-tier neutral cards of Chaos Zero Nightmare, the place where good ideas meet questionable execution. Acid Gas sounds spicy, but in practice it's more like a mild cough. It only costs one action point and applies a debuff that works decently against shields, which sounds fine on paper. The problem is that almost every other debuffed card above it just does more, better, and faster. You play this, shrug, and immediately wish you had drawn literally anything else. Tactical Reformation tries to look smart by reducing ego skill cost by 1, but here's the catch: ego skills are barely used in low difficulty fights, so most of the time this card just sits in your hand, taking up space, silently judging you for not being in a boss fight. Knowledge of Darkness is where things get messy. It costs 2 action points, consumes the card you draw, and the result is mostly random unless you've built your entire deck around draw manipulation. Add the fact that it is also an ultimate card, and suddenly you're paying a premium price for disappointment. Camouflage isn't awful, but it's awkward. You get 1 dodge and draw 2 cards next turn, which is actually decent value. The issue is that dodge only shines when an enemy is actively attacking you, and paying 2 action points for something that might matter later feels bad more often than it feels clever. Somnolent Fruit lives in a very specific ecosystem. It is a stress card, which already makes it useless outside of Chaos content. Even during Chaos runs, it only reduces stress for 1 action point as an ultimate card, which is underwhelming to say the least. Strategic Starting Point gives you ego points and nothing else. That might sound useful until you realize ego points are already easy to generate passively. Spending a valuable action point on this card usually just means you delayed doing something actually impactful. Recycling is a zero-cost card that converts ego points into action points, and that sounds amazing until you remember you actually want to save ego points for important fights. Using this card often creates awkward moments where you gain short-term value and lose long-term flexibility. Relentless Endurance slaps a massive shield on your character, but it costs 2 action points and does nothing else. No utility, no synergy, just shield. In a game where action economy matters a lot, that price tag makes this card way harder to justify. Wind of Relief gives agony for 1 action point, which already makes it a weak trade. It also exhausts when used for status or ailment removal, turning it into a very niche, very situational panic button rather than a reliable tool. Counterattack Preparation replaces your ego skill with other ego skills, which sounds flexible until you think about deck building. Ideally, you already chose good ego skills, so paying 1 action point and a card slot just to reshuffle them feels like fixing a problem that shouldn't exist. Protective Shout is a shield card that becomes stronger if you already have a shield. The idea is fine, but in practice, shield-focused units usually have much better options that do the same job with fewer hoops to jump through. Pulverize hits twice for 150% damage and draws a card, which honestly sounds solid. Unfortunately, the action points cost is extremely high for what you get, and by the time you play it, you often feel like you overpaid for a flashy animation. Aimed Fire is a 2-cost damage card with a conditional effect that rewards credit. Credit is only useful during chaos runs, so outside of that mode, this card becomes an expensive way to deal unimpressive damage. Atomic Decomposition deals piercing damage for 2 action points and is limited to psionics and controllers. Those classes usually have lower attack stats, which means this card often ends up dealing less damage than you hoped, despite its premium cost. Tackle asks for 3 action points, and even when its condition reduces the cost to 2, it still feels bad. The damage scales off defense, which usually results in low numbers, making this a high-cost card with very little payoff. Devotion deals defense-based damage and scales with resolve stacks. In theory, that sounds interesting, but in reality, most shield-focused characters would rather spend their action points staying alive instead of dealing mediocre damage. Heavy Bash applies vulnerable and weaken alongside damage, which is a nice combo. The problem is that it costs 2 action points, meaning you've already used most of your turn just to apply effects that you might not even be able to fully capitalize on. Consecutive attack is the definition of just damage. It costs 1 action point and does nothing special, which puts it on the same level as basic attack cards that you usually try to remove from your deck as early as possible. Shell Forming Cell gives a massive shield boost if your hand is full when you use it. The issue is that reaching maximum hand size consistently is harder than it sounds, making this card far less reliable than its numbers suggest. Forbidden Algorithm creates a random forbidden card in your hand, and randomness is the entire problem here. It costs too much and can easily generate a card your team cannot even use properly, turning excitement into regret in record time. And that's the C tier in a nutshell. Not unplayable, not impressive, and very good at making you question your life choices mid-run. The neutral cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Overwhelm, Spiked Shield, Shock, Ambush, Hand-to-Hand Combat, Sacred Strike, Negotiate, Financial Therapy, Wanderer of the Void, Determination, Tactical Action, Iron Wall, Destruction, Repent, Instinct Ignition, Propagative Virus, and Self-Generating Experiment. This is the tier where cards almost feel amazing, but still come with a small "yeah, but" attached to them. Welcome to B-tier neutral cards in Chaos Zero Nightmare, where power exists, just not without conditions. Instinct Ignition really wants to shine, but only inside Chaos zones. Outside of that environment, its value drops fast, turning it into a card that feels exciting during specific runs and completely forgettable everywhere else. Repent is a 1 action point enemy debuff, which sounds fine until you realize it often ends up being a net negative play. Spending a turn to slightly weaken an enemy instead of progressing, the fight usually just slows you down. Destruction is a strong example of controlled power. It deals 300% damage for just 1 action point, which is fantastic value, and the exhaust effect helps thin your deck. The downside is the discard requirement, which makes it awkward to use for many damage-focused characters who want consistency. Iron Wall is a long-term investment card. It grants permanent resolve and fortitude, which is undeniably strong over time, but the 2 action point cost makes it hard to justify in fast-paced fights where immediate impact matters more. Tactical Action is very matchup dependent. Against shield-heavy or barrier-focused enemies, it feels great as a cheap damage upgrade. Against enemies that barely use shields, it just sits in your hand doing absolutely nothing. Determination gives a free 50% damage boost to an attack card, which is powerful on its own. Unfortunately, the card itself costs 2 action points, making it surprisingly hard to fit into most decks without sacrificing tempo. Wanderer of the Void is one of those cards you love during very specific boss fights. Outside of those encounters, it offers poor value and mostly just clogs up a hand slot when you would rather draw something more flexible. Negotiate is the definition of a double-edged sword. It buffs your team, which is great, but it also buffs enemies, which can backfire spectacularly if the fight drags on longer than expected. Sacred Strike is excellent for breaking tenacity and delivers 200% damage for 1 action point, which is solid. However, because it does not draw a card or exhaust, it permanently occupies a slot in your deck, which can be a downside for optimized damage builds. Hand-to-hand combat offers a nice mix of offense and defense by providing crystallization and shielding the team. The catch is that its damage scales with defense, making it restrictive and only truly effective on certain characters. Ambush is a zero-cost damage card, which already gives it points. The issue is that its Ravage and Tenacity break effects are not always available, turning it into a dead card in many situations. Shock hits hard with 200% damage and applies 2 stacks of vulnerable to all enemies, making it a very strong offensive option. The problem is its 2 action point cost, which often prevents you from fully capitalizing on the debuff in the same turn. Spiked Shield deals area damage and scales with defense, which sounds good for tanky builds. Unfortunately, its secondary effect requires killing a unit, making it unreliable and hard to use consistently in tougher encounters. Overwhelm delivers high damage to all enemies and exhausts, helping thin your deck. The downside is that it leaves behind 2 overload cards, which can slow future turns and make timing extremely important. Financial Therapy is a 1 action point heal that exhausts and comes with a strong 212% multiplier. It becomes more appealing in Chaos runs thanks to the credit restoration, but outside of Chaos, it feels noticeably weaker. Propagative Virus has massive potential, dealing 120% damage 5 times if drawn 5 times in a single battle. That power comes at a cost, as it relies heavily on discard mechanics and card draw to truly shine. Self-Generating Experiment is a very interesting engine card. Once per turn, it reduces the cost of cards to 0 action points when your hand has 6 or more cards. It can be incredibly strong, but only in decks built around expensive cards and heavy cards draw. B tier is all about if the conditions are right. These cards can absolutely carry runs, but only if you build around them and play to their strengths. The neutral cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Quick Draw, Hidden Bullet, Quick Shelling, Maneuvering Fire, Energy Barrier, Rage, Glorious Resistance, Muscle Enhanced Evolver, and Forced Learning Apparatus. Now we're stepping into the tier where cards stop asking for permission and start deciding the fight. A tier neutral cards in Chaos, Zero Nightmare are powerful, flexible, and often feel illegal when played correctly. Glorious Resistance is the kind of card that makes your entire run smoother. It gives a permanent +1 action point for the whole fight, which is massive. The extra cost is only 10% of the team's health, and with a healer around, that downside barely exists. The only real drawback is the free action point cost, meaning you accept 1 weak turn in exchange for dominating every turn after. Rage is beautifully simple and brutally effective. Once active, it turns into a 0 cost card that deals 200% damage. It fits perfectly on a main damage dealer, especially when the rest of the team runs low cost cards and keeps the engine moving. Energy Barrier does multiple jobs at once, which is why it sits comfortably in A tier. It exhausts after use, thinning your deck, gives you free action points when played, and adds a bit of shield on top. It is the definition of efficient value. Maneuvering Fire is pure tempo. It costs 0 action points and deals 200% area damage, which means you can start a fight with a huge advantage before enemies even get comfortable. Few cards swing early momentum this hard. Quick Shelling is sneaky strong. Being a 0 cost card that also draws another card means it is essentially free, and the bonus 80% damage it provides just feels like a gift every time it appears in your hand. Hidden Bullet rewards patience. It starts at 100% damage, but thanks to the Rihin bonus increasing damage by 50%, you can hold onto it during long fights and unleash massive damage later for 0 cost. It is flexible, strategic, and extremely satisfying. Quick Draw delivers 150% damage and applies Mark at no cost, making it an incredibly cheap and efficient damage option. It sets up future hits while already pulling its weight the moment you play it. Muscle Enhanced Evolver is terrifying when it is online. With Inspiration active, it hits 4 times for 80% damage each, all for just 1 action point. It scales incredibly well with morale and damage buffs, but it does rely heavily on card draw to stay active. Forced Learning Apparatus turns efficient play into free value. After you use 4 cards, it gives you a free card draw once every turn. It thrives in decks filled with low-cost cards, rewarding smart sequencing with constant momentum. A tier cards do not just help your strategy, they define it. If you see these during a run, your deck is probably about to get a lot scarier. The neutral cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Rally Common, Gear Bag, Attack, Aggressive Mutant, and Confiscation. This is the tier where balance politely leaves the room and never comes back. S tier, neutral cards in Chaos, Zero, Nightmare are not just strong, they actively bend the rules of the game in your favor. Gear Bag is pure, unconditional value. It gives you free card draw and then exhausts itself, which means your deck immediately becomes thinner and more consistent. There is no setup, no downside, and no situation where drawing Gear Bag feels bad. Rally, even in its common version, is absurdly powerful. It gives free card draw and also grants an extra action point, which often lets you interrupt enemy plans mid-turn. Suddenly, shields do not go up, debuffs never land, and you get to dictate the entire flow of combat. Attack is basically cheating, but in a friendly way. It fetches a card from your deck for free, functioning almost exactly like Cassius's Joker card, except this one has no cost. That alone makes it stronger in a surprising number of situations, especially when consistency matters. Confiscation is another example of why free card draw is king. On top of drawing a card at no cost, it can also search for your forbidden card, turning it into both a consistency tool and a combo enabler with zero action point investment. Aggressive Mutant is the perfect finisher setup. It draws a free attack card, boosts all attack damage by 50% for the turn, and then exhausts itself so it never clogs your deck again. It gives you tempo, power, and cleanliness all in one button press. S tier cards do not ask what your strategy is, they simply make it better. If one of these shows up, you take it, smile, and let Chaos Zero Nightmare do the rest. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.